The plight of Christians in Narendra Modi's India remains terribly severe, with almost weekly reports of churches being attacked, pastors being beaten, even murders being committed by Hindu nationalists. It is so important that Christians continue to pray and bear up our brothers and sisters in Christ across the massive landmass that is India. I'm Regan King, and I'm joined by my good friend and co-host, Alistair Scott, for this evening's edition of the Persecuted Church. Evening, Alistair.
It's good to be here again.
Now, you have a lot of interest in Pakistan, on the other side of things. Have you been to India?
I have. I've been to India and been part of some of the bigger, call them crusades, but bigger meetings where you get tens of thousands of people. I was born actually on the subcontinent. I was born in Pakistan, lived there till I was 12 years old. And, you know, you always thought about India as being a fairly peaceful, the Hinduism and the religion being a fairly peaceful, tolerant religion. But certainly since this new government, things have changed rapidly and dramatically, and they are now quite violently evangelical as Hindus, if you want to call it that, aiming to rid the nation of Christians. And yet, you know, in the past, Christians lived alongside the Hindus. They were quite happy to have their churches and so on. And, you know, we're seeing the stories now. With Modi as a new leader, he is an evangelical Hindu, and he wants to wipe out every other religion and make it a Hindu nation, which it is, but it has been in the past far more tolerant of other religions. And of course, because of the economy and his kind of power, he's influencing a lot of nations around them too. I've worked in Nepal and I've seen the influence of Modi in Nepal too. And he's a man with a lot of power at the moment, and he's changing things very rapidly in India. So
there's some significant Christian context to India in that we have, even from Old Testament times, the presence of God's people, presence of Jews in India from the days of Solomon. And then we have, of course, the Persian Empire, which spread across from India all the way to Ethiopia. There would have been, as part of that diaspora of the Jewish people from the land, Jewish communities in various parts of India. And this is something that's often forgotten, that people don't often think about. But there's ancient Hebrew texts and seemingly even synagogues that have been found in Chennai and similar places there. This points to a realization and an understanding among some who were dwelling in India of the one true God. Of course, Thomas, the apostle, it's believed that his life ended after 20 years of faithful missionary service, first of all among the Jewish community that was there in India, but then as things began to spread out, as the gospel began to be proclaimed to the normal everyday people and the Brahmin of India, you began to see opposition. He faces persecution, and he himself is speared to death, believed to be in India. So there's that history, and there's been a history of suffering and a history of difficulty, but it wasn't really until the days of William Carey that we see a known revived impact of the gospel in the subcontinent.
One of the things, as you're mentioning there, Modi, the one thing in his favor, if you like, is he's very favorable to Israel. He's a good friend of Israel. And you know, we've seen reports recently of the Jewish communities in India traveling back to be part of the diaspora back into Israel, and talked about as being maybe the lost tribes of the Jewish people from going back for many centuries. So I guess, you know, the fact that he is favorable towards Israel and has a good relationship with the government of Israel probably is one of the major good sides of what's going on. But the way they are persecuting Christians, to the point where we read about it regularly of churches being burned down, being ransacked, and violence, which are, you know, all the time I was in the subcontinent as a child, I was only up there till 12, you never thought of the Hindus being violently against anyone, but it's happening.
It's not so much that it's coming from Modi himself. Indeed, he's actually on a couple of occasions condemned some of the violence. but it's that practically on the ground itself, nothing is being done to halt raging mobs of Hindu nationalists and supporters of Modi and his BJP party, which is a Hindu nationalist party. There's 1.42 billion people in India. It's massive. It's an insane amount of people in a massive land area. 28 states, 8 union territories in addition to those, 22 different national languages as well, with 28 million professing Christians. And we look at that and say, that's amazing, but that makes only 2% of the population.
Very small amount, in comparison.
And then that's without also factoring in how many of these are born again, how many of these are evangelical in that sense as well. But it currently ranks as the 11th most dangerous place to be a Christian in Open Doors World Watch List.
That's a surprise as well. I mean, I would have never, if you told me that 10 years ago, that in 10 years' time, India would be just out of the top 10 and moving into the top 10 as the most dangerous place for Christians, because Christians were thriving, the churches were doing well. And of course, because the most influential Christianity in the subcontinent, and that's as much in Pakistan as it is in India, is the traditional churches. I mean, the Catholic churches were very predominant and were part of providing the services that the nation needed. So in the early days, and that's why I would say the majority of people are either part of the Protestant Church of England or Church of India, as it would be called there, and Catholics. They are the biggest, but there has been a huge move of evangelical Christianity in the land. I know many pastors who are going from state to state, planting churches, Bible colleges that are being established to teach people. And there was a rapid movement. There was a rapid movement of Hindus converting to Christianity because of the nature of the Christian message. But obviously now with the government's kind of backing the opposition against Christianity, and as you said, it's very similar in Pakistan, the security forces are not helping. When an attack comes against a Christian church, they're more or less encouraged, or the police stand back and watch rather than get in there to try and protect the people who are in the churches. So it's a change around big time.
In the past year, things have gotten even worse. Just about a year ago, though, our friends at CBN released a very important report showing how 300 churches were being destroyed and had been destroyed by Hindu mobs, how persecution was on the rise. Even then, it's gotten worse as the year has gone along. Here is that important report.
India's northeastern state of Manipur is making headlines.
Manipur means land of jewels.
Outside the capital, armed guards protect a Kuki village. They're volunteers who are on the lookout for Meitei attackers.
But the state, affectionately known as the Switzerland of India for its natural beauty and remoteness, looks more like a war zone today.
Some argue the Northeast Indian state is in a state of civil war, with news of burnings and beheadings.
Religious and ethnic clashes between the Hindu majority Meitei community and the tribal Christian Kuki minority over land and influence in the state has left at least 180 people dead and over 500 injured.
300 churches have been destroyed. And just imagine that, if 1, 2, 5, 10 were destroyed, but we're talking about 300 churches destroyed.
The European Parliament accuses India's Hindu-led BJP government and its Prime Minister Narendra Modi of fueling the violence by pursuing, quote, politically motivated, divisive policies promoting Hindu majoritarianism. Modi, whose party controls Manipur's state government, faced a no-confidence motion in Parliament last week for his silence on the escalating violence.
The underlying issue here is that the central government, the BJP party led by Prime Minister Modi, has not reacted. He's been forced to make one comment, but even that was setting a context for why the violence was happening that ignored the violence against Christians.
In Manipur's capital city, Hindu women creating roadblocks like this one to check cars for Christians. In May, a Hindu mob paraded naked 2 Christian women. One had been reportedly gang raped. Several videos on social media showed mobs also burning down churches.
The perpetrators themselves are posting videos of mob attacks on churches. They're showing the churches being burned down. They literally show the police stepping aside to allow the mob to attack these Christian churches.
As a result, Christians have lost complete trust in the Manipur police. This video showing dozens of Christian women kneeling, crying, and begging Indian soldiers to stay in their village, fearful of more Hindu attacks. Fighting erupted in early May when the state government extended land, jobs, and other benefits typically reserved for the minority Christians to the Hindus. The decision led to some of the worst fighting between the 2 biggest tribes in the state. Human rights and religious freedom experts accuse Modi's government of pushing a radical ideology that believes India is for Hindus only, despite its pluralistic and diverse society.
This political movement is essentially saying India is your homeland, but it must also be your holy land. And it's putting a religious umbrella over everything that happens. And it's allowing them to force other minority faiths out.
The violence in Manipur has displaced more than 60,000 people internally. And it's not just in Manipur. The New Delhi-based United Christian Forum says there have been more than 400 incidents against Christians in 22 other Indian states in the first 6 months of this year.
That's quite an awakening report for us as Christians to be aware of, particularly when you hear about how they treat women. You know, we hear about the Islamic community misusing or abusing women, but here you're seeing women who are being paraded naked in the streets and raped, gang raped, and so on, really treated in an appalling way. So we know how important it is for us to be praying for these nations and pray for them to be free again, because, you know, part of their policies as governments is that they have apparently freedom of religion. Same thing in Pakistan, but the reality is it doesn't happen. I mean, that report made the point I made earlier, that the police just stand by and watch what's going on when it comes to attacks against the Christian community.
They're complicit in it.
And are complicit, yeah. So they are actually protecting the violent people rather than protecting the Christians. But the encouraging thing there was to see how the Christians remain faithful and remain praying people themselves. But I was just thinking, you know, it's about a year ago when you were in India, weren't you? Around about this time last year. And you had a great time there. But did you see much of the persecution?
Well, definitely it was a concern to people. I mean, the reality of where we were and what they were experiencing there at Uttar Pradesh. It is the most populous of India's states. It also is often considered as one of the most backwards and one of the most ultra-Hindu. Of course, right there on the Ganga River, you have thousands, tens of thousands of people every day offering sacrifices and offerings to Shiva. It's essentially Hinduism is a death cult. You have throughout the Bhagavad Gita, the various entities and deities declaring, I am death. And the message that we were giving wherever we went was, in the Bhagavad Gita, you have Krishna or someone else say, I am death. Jesus says, I am life. Yeah. And we're holding that out, and there was good response even from Hindus who were in these various groups that we were speaking to. At the same time, we were unable to have a normal gathering in that state, in that particular region, on the Sunday, because there were concerns and had been expressed at some point that there were operatives watching this particular congregation. So they met on that day, but every other day we were able to be with and were able to trained and were able to do ministry alongside. So there definitely is that fear. Pastor friend has been beaten with rods, and he has been driven out of particular towns as well. But it has definitely worsened in recent years. Just in this past year, International Christian Concern recently reported that just 6 months after the BJP party that Modi is a part of came to power in Odisha state, we were talking about Manipur there with CBN, but in Odisha state, the number of attacks against Christians has spiked, with 1 week seeing Christians specifically singled out and targeted 3 times just in 1 week alone. Toward the end of October as well, there was a group, another Hindu nationalist group, that disrupted a prayer and worship gathering in a village. You can find on YouTube, some of these churches do post footage of what's going on for people's awareness, and it is quite grim. People being just beaten up in these house churches, many of them in other churches as well that are more recognizable. But members of this particular Hindu nationalist group barged into the prayer gathering, stopped the service, shouted slogans and praises to their own gods. The Hindu nationalists then called the police, who took the pastor into custody. Remember, they're the ones who have been beating up, right? And so then the police come, they take the pastor into custody. There's no proper complaint. There's no verifying of facts. It's all just a lynching, essentially. About 155 miles away from there, another pastor looking after a small village church among tribal members in the Malkangiri district was evicted from the church along with his wife and was warned not to return if they valued their life, leaving that church without a pastor and the pastor without his church and any support. So there's so many people who are being displaced as a result of this as well.
And to be honest, that is actually breaking the law, because of the policy of the nation is to have freedom of religion. For people to come in and break down or burn down the church buildings and take the pastors into, basically into captivity. False allegations is often the way. It's against the law, and really, I guess we should be making more of a challenge to these nations and these governments, because you can challenge them on their own policies, and certainly prayer.
Well, we definitely heard in that CBN news report from Global Christian Relief, they are actively seeking to highlight the plight of the persecuted church there in India. We have this report.
Persecution in India is at an all-time high.
मैं विश्वास करता हूँ, चाहे मेरा गला भी कट जाए, मेरे सर भी फूट जाए, मुझे कुछ भी हो जाए, मैं कभी छोड़ने वाला नहीं हूँ, क्योंकि मुझे उसी ने मुझे बनाया है, उसने मुझे जीवन दिया है।
I'm here in central India. We just met with believers from an area called Chhattisgarh that has been devastated by extremists.
10 लोग मेरे को मारे, लातों लात मारे, मारते समय भी मेरे को
ऐसा लग रहा था मेरा जीवन अब खत्म होने वाला है।
हम लोग प्रभु यीशु मसीह को नहीं छोड़ेंगे, ऐसा मतलब प्रभु यीशु मसीह को नहीं छोड़े उस दिन।
यीशु के लिए कुछ भी करने के लिए मैं तैयार था।
I want to encourage you to stand with them in prayer as one church and one family, so that they'll know they're never alone.
प्रार्थना कीजिए, मेरा यही विषय है, मैं यही चाह रहा हूँ कि
और मेरे शहर के लिए, मेरे छत्तीसगढ़ के लिए, मेरा देश के लिए।
I pray for your protection on his life and on his family. I pray that you would guide him to continue to be a great example, that many others would see his faith.
देश, पूरा देश यीशु के नाम में बदल जाए।
Every donation you make will help provide emergency relief kits for displaced Christians. Join us today.
Global Christian Relief are doing fantastic work in highlighting the plight of persecuted Christians. And International Christian Concern also reports on that same place that that video is based in. They're from Global Christian Relief, Chhattisgarh, India. There were a group of police officers who watched as hundreds of people attacked 14 Christians on October the 30th after they defied orders to abandon their Christian faith, and they harvested crops from a communal farm. Several of the Christians, including 2 women, were beaten with wooden rods and suffered head trauma and broken bones. The mob also demolished believers' houses, destroyed the crops that they were harvesting, and they injured another police officer who did try to intervene. So this is also why some of the police officers are standing back and doing nothing, because they're concerned for their own safety and they're not invested in the situation in any faith way. One Christian rights activist, Nagesh Mikha, questioned why the police failed to fulfill their duty and promptly act. The police, which are supposed to uphold the fundamental rights of an individual, have allowed 14 people to be beaten in their presence. This means there are higher authorities who are supporting the mobs. And so this crisis continues to worsen, with even thousands of Christians being displaced, dozens of churches burned down, and many believers killed.
They say that we give people money to convert and lure Hindus to Christianity.
In the Indian state where Lakshman lives, an anti-conversion law is in place to prevent people from leaving one faith for another. After his church grew from 3 to 250 members, Hindu extremists began accusing Lakshman of forcing people to convert.
They called one believer and started threatening him. Look, your name is on this list, and the government will run a bulldozer over your house. If you want to stop this from happening, you have to sign this paper, and we will have your name removed. That's how you can escape this. So he became scared, and they made him sign a blank piece of paper. Once they had his signature, they wrote all kinds of things against me. They wrote that I perform religious conversions by giving money, that I give people money and make them change their religion.
Once the police had this falsified statement, they came to arrest Lakshman in the middle of church.
We were conducting a prayer meeting where 250 people were gathered. While we were praying, around 6 or 7 policemen arrived in a van. They burst in through the back door and took hold of me and started beating me. I asked them, "Sir, why are you doing this? What happened? Please tell me." They did not stop or listen to my requests, but kept beating me. I thought that someone would come and save me, but no one came forward.
Lakshman was taken to the police station, where he continued to be mistreated.
One of them was kicking me. Another was hitting me with a stick, while the other was abusing me using filthy language. When all this happened, I was very disheartened, upset, and in great pain. Then a sweet sound came to my ears. I heard a very sweet sound. It was a voice speaking a verse from the Lord, which says, "Do not be afraid, for I am with you." Then I found courage and I totally forgot all my pain. That sound was so sweet. And I found a new strength, courage and power in that moment.
After 6 days, Lakshman was released on bail. He returned to find that the church building had been destroyed. The police are monitoring him and the other Christians, but he's determined to keep leading the believers in his village.
We are not able to gather in the church, but we are still gathering in small groups. This ministry is not ours, but the Lord's, so no one can stop it.
The thing is with both in India and Pakistan, where I haven't been in India recently, so it's been quite a while, but Pakistan I'm regularly there. People know where the Christian communities are because they really are a city on a hill that cannot be hidden. They believe their faith, they meet together, they encourage one another. So they are in some ways an easy target because the violent people know how to find them. So they do suffer violence, they do suffer these attacks, but they stay faithful to their God. They're not going to give up, and they will rebuild a church that's been burnt down, or have a makeshift church where they can meet and encourage one another. And it's very, very sad to see this spread across, when we looked at the map earlier of the spread of the states where the Christians are really being targeted and attacked. But again, it's so important for us to be aware of these things because, some of us will probably go on holiday to India and love it. It's a beautiful place. So you said that earlier. It's a beautiful, beautiful country. But there's a lot of bad things going on, and particularly against our brothers and sisters. So, again, we really need to keep lifting them up before the Lord, that God would give them strategies not only to survive, but to continue to thrive. Because I know when I speak to people on the ground level, they are very interested in the message of the love of Christ and the love of Christianity. So, as believers, let's keep praying for these nations, support them, get behind these other charities that are helping in these nations too, because they really do need support. But more than anything, it's the old adage, just keep praying for our brothers and sisters in these nations afar off who are struggling, who are suffering, but they are keeping their faith strong.